Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
I always say that men make change based on one of two motivating factors. The first is the man who wants an edge, a way to raise his performance, and he's willing to come off autopilot and proactively engage in the optimization of his life. The second is the man who changes once the Mack Truck hits him, when something is undeniably broken and he's forced to confront what is no longer working. Now, in the context of physical health, we're talking about panic attacks, erectile dysfunction, chronic anxiety, stifling brain fog. Listen, if you're here to live in alignment with your great man, who you are at your fullest potential, then you have to be fully engaged in optimizing your foundation, which is your physical, mental, and emotional well-being. Now, with the explosion of information at your fingertips, data from wearable devices, fasting protocols, supplements, specialized diets, it can get really confusing really quickly. And maybe you've tried a bunch of this stuff to little or no avail, leaving you frustrated and disenfranchised. The two main issues that I've experienced in trying to cobble together all of that information that's out there is, number one, that information isn't personalized to you. Generalized information about diet, about supplementation is like shooting in the dark. And I could show you cabinets full of supplements that I've purchased that I have no idea if they've ever worked for me or not. The second is you don't have an expert helping you to make sense of all the data that's available. Right? Like we all have these trackable devices where what do I do with the information? What are the tests that I'm taking? Allergy tests, blood tests, hormone panels, genetic tests. How do I make sense of all that stuff so that I can actually affect how I'm sleeping, how I'm eating, when I'm working out, how I'm managing my stress? So that's why today we want to really simplify the three essential types of tests that men need to take to get a state of the union current day on your physical, mental, and emotional well-being, and how to secure the expert guidance that you'll want at your side to help you make sense of that data and direct the next action steps to elevate your well-being. And I can tell you firsthand that it took me a decade on my journey to cobble this system together, where I'm finally at that place where I'm feeling like I've optimized my well-being, my gut health, my sleep. And what we're about to talk about today, this protocol, has made it so much simpler that you can kind of find a comprehensive package and a plan to work you through all of this. So to guide us through that conversation is one of our favorite guests on the show, a third-time appearance by Brian and I's good friend, Dr. Myles Spar. So who is Dr. Myles Spar? He's the National Medical Director of Vault Health. Now, Vault Health secured the very first FDA approval for at-home COVID tests at the very beginning of the pandemic. And back on March 3rd of 2020, right before the pandemic broke, Vault Health had a valuation of $30 million in their Series A funding. Can you imagine what their valuation is today after they have become like one of the leading authorities here in the United States on at-home COVID tests? I can only imagine that probably 10x or beyond that now, maybe 100x, who the hell knows? He's an integrative medicine doctor focusing on optimizing men's health. So instead of the doctor who looks at you and says, yeah, there's nothing wrong, he's looking at you and goes, okay, great, there's nothing wrong. Now, how do we optimize what's going well for you so that you can perform at your fullest potential? He's the author of Optimal Men's Health, which is a book you can get on Amazon. I'm linking that in the show notes. And he has a TEDx talk called Change Your Annual Checkup to a Check-In and Live Longer. And he's a member of the Great Man Mastermind 1.0 and is building a protocol, a 90-day protocol to optimize men's health for all of the members of our Mastermind 1.0 community, which will eventually roll out to the other masterminds as well. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about the three types of tests that men need to take to get a comprehensive state of the union on your overall health. Dr. Myles will also go through all of the wearable devices that are out there, like the Oura Ring, the Whoop Band, the Fitbit, your Apple Watch. Which one of those does the best for sleep? which does the best for stress resiliency, which one of them is like the Toyota Camry, where that kind of gives you a good overview of all of the things that you want to use to have the data on your overall health. I'm going to be sharing with you a story of my own personal experience of 15 years of gut issues, which, if we're speaking in layman's terms, I had gas problems, fart problems, which I finally have been able to resolve through the protocol that we're going to be talking about today, which has given me a complete new lease on life and feeling of liberation and freedom around my health. Why men are now starting to move beyond just focusing on the cosmetic physical appearance of our bodies and asking deeper questions and placing a greater emphasis on optimizing energy levels, focus, memory, and mental optimization. And then finally, how optimal health can be used as the most important tool in your toolbox to live as your great man, the fullest potential version of who you are. So enjoy the third appearance of Dr. Myles Spar on the show, talking about the 3 essential tests to optimize men's physical health.
Dominic, the word test for me is anxiety provoking, just generally speaking. But when we're talking about my biology, like my health, is even more anxiety provoking because every time I go get a test, it's either nothing happens or something awful happens. So when I went in, I got tested for testicular cancer, boom, cancer.
Right.
When I got tested for STDs, boom, chlamydia. And like, it sucks every single time. And the reason I'm pumped to have this conversation with you and Dr. Myles Spar is because the test that we're talking about, or the health that we're talking about, isn't like nothing or terribleness. It's about optimization, about wellness, about how do we live our best lives and energy. So I'm really pumped to get into this conversation today because we got a true bona fide expert in the field.
That's right. And it's your third time on the show, Dr. Myles Spar. You came on in 2020 as our final in-person guest before the COVID lockdown. You came on again last year in the midst of the pandemic. And then here you are now to talk again about optimization in men's health. And you've even shared with us that the kinds of questions men are asking now and the forms of optimization that they're seeking are very different than they were just a couple of years ago before the pandemic. So maybe just start there. What are you seeing?
Sure. Well, first of all, great to be back with you, gentlemen. I feel like I should get a punch card and I get like a free coffee or something at some point soon. But yeah, I love the work y'all are doing on the podcast. So it's such an honor to be here again. It's really interesting. I've been focusing on men's health for most of my professional life, for at least the last 15 years. I do integrative men's health. I'm an internist, but really focusing on not just treating acute problems, but helping guys perform better, prevent problems before they even start to arise and understand their risks and all that. And it used to be a really hard sell. So I used to have to kind of Trojan horse my work by saying, a lot of what I do will help you look better. It'll help you gain muscle mass and lose belly fat. And so a lot of the time the guys would come for that. And then I would say, by the way, we should also check your testosterone, not so that you can get bigger muscles, but because it affects your cardiovascular health or your metabolic health. And by the way, erectile dysfunction could be an early sign of blockage in your arteries or in your heart. So let's look at that. So I would kind of use those interests in looking better to find some preventive strategies that I could offer guys. Over the last couple of years, and I don't know if it's because of COVID, I don't know if it's because of Me Too, I don't know if it's just a lot more kind of self-reflection of what it means to be a healthy, successful man. I ask everybody, I'm like, what are your top goals? And increased body composition, looking better is one of those. That used to be always like number 1 or 2. Now it isn't. Now 1 or 2 is, I want to prevent problems. I want to just feel better in terms of energy level. I want to be more focused mentally. So there's definitely been a shift. I mean, certainly guys want to look better, but that doesn't seem to be the number 1, 2, and 3 like it used to be.
Why do you think that is?
I do think there's been a little more introspection about what does it mean to be successful and fulfilled. Part of it maybe was having alone time because of COVID. Part of it was COVID and the pandemic really making us change all of our habits and all of our automated way of behaving and thinking, and have to be a lot more resilient and a lot more kind of able to pivot in a lot of ways. And so part of that was about we were on autopilot. Like, this is what you're supposed to look like. This is what you're supposed to do. And we're going to the gym and all that kind of stuff. And then suddenly it was like, okay, now it's a pain in the ass to do a workout. So why do I want to do a workout? Like, if I'm going to figure out how to make it happen, what is it all about? And it needs to be more than just about losing the belly fat because it's such a pain in the ass. And if I understand that it's going to help me in the long run, that's going to motivate me more. That could be part of it. But I think in general, people have just gotten more kind of reflective about what's important. We see that in the job market, right? So many people have left their jobs because they were like just doing it. They were just on autopilot, like, I'm just doing my job. They're like, screw this. This isn't fulfilling for me. This isn't what I'm here on this planet to do. And so I think it's the same thing that's behind that.
Yeah, these last 2 years have been like an initiation for many people. But since we're talking about men, let's just say men in general, I know that in my work, men typically make change in their lives when it's either one of two things that catalyze a man to make a change in his life. Number one, he wants an edge, right? Like, he's a high performer, wants an edge. Give me that cutting edge thing that's going to make me perform better. Or something is undeniably broken.
Right.
Right. And Brian, this comes back to your opening comments about my testicle was growing and in pain for 3 months. It's undeniable at this stage. Now I got to go get tested. And I would say a lot of guys' impetus for change, historically speaking, has just waiting for the Mack Truck to hit them.
Yep, absolutely.
And I think the shift that you're seeing now is after 2 years of an elongated Mack Truck running over you, backing up over you, running back over you again, guys are starting to be like, okay, let's get prioritized. Let's optimize around this. And you're saying prevent the problems. So let's take this a step further. I've been on this journey of optimizing my own health for years, and it has been a nightmare to try and cobble all of the right questions I should be asking together, the resources. And one of the things I've maybe hinted about a little bit on the show, for 15 years, I've had like issues with my gut, my digestive system. And you get these scattered pieces of advice like go gluten-free or go no FODMAP diet or take curcumin or get a distilled water filter. It's like you do all these things and nothing much changes. And I start to feel that sense of helplessness. But what you have been building with Brian inside of our mastermind is like this comprehensive, here's all the questions you need to be asking, the tests you need to be running. Here's the support system. That's like, it took me 10 years to actually cobble that together for myself. You've put that together. So can you describe what it is that you and Brian are building and how that might be useful to our listeners, whether they work with you or want to build it on their own?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think, to some degree, it speaks to what you were saying, Brian, at the beginning. Like, guys are nervous about getting a workup done for a lot of reasons. One is for the reasons you stated. Like, they're scared that they're going to find something they don't want to know that they have, even though we all know it's better to deal with things early on. And so it doesn't really make sense. Still, that fear kind of stops you from getting tested. So a lot of guys don't get any kind of workup done because they don't want to find out something's really bad. And they don't even want to find out, oh, I can't eat hot dogs anymore because the doc's just going to tell me my cholesterol's high. So even if it's not that bad, like cancer, they don't even want to find out a little bit bad. Like, you got to really, they don't want to be called out, right? That everything they know is true, that they shouldn't be eating the way they're eating and they should actually be more active. So that's one block to doing tests. So, the way we frame it with these guys in the mastermind is this isn't about like testing to restrict you. This is about testing to figure out two different things. What are your risks of things that could get in the way of you really being the great man you want to be? Because that's our whole mastermind, is about the great man's mastermind, but that applies to anybody. Like, how does your health potentially hinder you being able to fulfill whatever it is you want to be fulfilling? What are you on this planet to do? Or in the case of like Brian, when you had that big old hunkin' ball, how could the health actually not just hinder you, but how could it really stop you and waylay your entire track? And on the other hand, how could your health be optimized to help you achieve whatever your goals are? So that's how we frame it with the GMM, with the Great Man's Mastermind. It's like, okay, let's look at your health and these biomarkers of your health so we can see not just how's your health, because health isn't the goal in and of itself, but it's how could health be used by you as the most important tool in your toolbox? Because if there's something seriously wrong, that's going to completely derail you. And if there's nothing wrong, maybe there's some things you can do to actually make sure your health is really in service of you achieving your goals. So that's kind of how we set it up and really built the whole strategy around what are your risks for problems and what currently are things that really are something you need to work on to prevent.
Becca and I recently took a genetic test to make sure that if we were lucky enough to have kids, that there was no, issues with the genes. So the doctor got on the phone with us to read us out the results. And they said that there's nothing really to worry about, a couple of things here or there. And then that was it. The phone call was done in about 3.5 minutes. And I said, hold on a second, doc. I said, I got to ask, like, you mentioned that there's nothing bad, but is there anything good? Is there any chance that the kid could fly or be super smart or like be an X-Man or Marvel character, anything like that? Is there anything like that you can see, And she thought I was joking, but I kind of wasn't, because that's my desire. Right? My desire is, with these tests that we're doing for the Great Man Mastermind, it's not just about what's going to derail you, but these guys are high-powered guys that have a lot that they want to do between the ages 23 up to maybe 60 in here, and each one of these guys wants to take a chunk out of life. And so to do that, they got to feel it, right? Biology is our baseline, and if that's not straight, we can't do what we want. And so that's why I'm so pumped about this, is that these guys want to be operating right into their 90s. And how else are we going to get there?
Thank you. That's a perfect way of putting, like, for example, that was a real opportunity lost. Nothing against this fertility doctor, but the next conversation should have been, and this is the conversation you and I are having with these guys, right? It's, okay, everything's good. So let me tell you what you can do to make sure your fertility is optimized. So this is where most doctors stop, is where she stopped. And it's because they're overworked. I'm a primary care doc at heart, so nothing against primary care docs. But unfortunately, that is where most stop. It's like, nothing's broken. Okay, see you next year. Right? But where we go and where I go in my practice is, awesome, nothing's broken. We don't have to put out any fires. So now let's look at, what are your goals? What can you be doing to be really optimal? Because you have the luxury of focusing, just like you said, on optimal performance, on health span, not just lifespan of living to 100, but living healthy to 100. I mean, most of the guys, when we talk to them about why do they want to find out what should they be eating, what should they be taking supplement wise, what kind of activity, it's because they want to be able literally to climb mountains. I mean, one of our guys, he's been climbing mountains in Mexico. Like, that's his number one thing, is I want to climb mountains with my kids when they're like in college, and we can go to wherever we want to go in the world and do something very physical. And I don't want to be old and decrepit. So that's a great example of, like, your question was kind of a joke. You want your swimmers to produce Marvel characters, but no, but you wanted some more advice. Like, okay, great. Everything looks good, but how can it be more than just good? How can it be more than just not broken? And that's what the biomarkers help us know. For Brian, what should you be doing to perform at your best? For Dom, it's different. For Dom, it was his gut. So what should he be doing for his gut? For you, it might be something about sleep and really honing in on sleep. For somebody else, it might be about stress management. So that's what we do, is we do those tests. And that's how I work with all my patients, is really figuring out what are the levers that are most important for them to achieve those goals. And then having a partner in that who's a coach, which I know Dom had mentioned wanting to talk about, that really helps guys hold their feet to the fire and implement some of the recommendations.
This is great. And the biggest mindset shift that you are talking about here is, when most men have thought about doctors in the past, it's been from a pathological lens. But what's wrong with me? And most doctors respond with either there's nothing wrong with you or there's something wrong with you. And so there's that fear of engaging. And what we're talking about here is this shift from pathology to optimization. I want everyone who's listening here to understand that's the shift of what we're talking about. Now let's get specific here, around some of the tests, right? I know 3 of the big tests that have been really helpful for me, and I know that you guys are building this into the protocol, are genetic test, and then the blood test which has your hormone panels, and then a poop test. And I think it'd be really helpful for our listeners to understand, like, why would you test each of these categories? The genetic test, the blood hormone panel, and then the poop test, and what can be gleaned from these?
Absolutely nothing, but I make a ton of money every time I do this. No, all right. So let's go through it. No, it's a great question. I mean, because these are all tests that are often beyond what's in the annual physical. I did a whole TED X talk about how worthless the general annual physical is because they don't do this level of testing. They do your basic, is anything broke level of testing, just like we were talking about. So the next level of testing is just like Brian said, it's to help you kind of perform at your best and figure out how do you stay as healthy and as functional as possible. So one of those, like you said, are genetic tests. I feel like everybody should have a good genetic test done to see what are they at risk for, not to find out their destiny. And that's what we used to think, right? We used to think like, even when I was in med school, we were taught your genes are your destiny. If you have bad genes, you're screwed. If you had, grandfather with Alzheimer's disease, you're going to get Alzheimer's. We now know that is not true. And hopefully your listeners have gleaned that by now, that your genes give you some idea of what you need to work on more than the next guy because you have some risks, but we can turn on and off our genes. We can affect what genes actually get what's called transcribed and actually turn into the proteins that they're meant to do and do bad things, or we can turn off those bad genes and turn on the good genes to help prevent problems. But we need to know which genes are likely to cause problems to know which ones to focus on turning off. That's called epigenetics. For any listeners, I want to look that up. And literally about 80% of your risk for disease is completely in your control. Only about 20% is hardwired. You're going to get something no matter what. So the vast majority is in your control. So that's where the genetic tests come in.
Specific example on that, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. For example, Alzheimer's, right? There's the genetic markers, which you could either have 0 genetic markers, 1 or 2, right? And meaning that you might be at risk if you eat a typical American diet. If you have like 1 or 2 of the genes, that you may, if you eat a typical American diet, you live a typical American stressed out life, you sleep the typical American way, which is very little. Therefore, you'd be at a higher risk of getting Alzheimer's. That's why we see an explosion of Alzheimer's in America. But if we live an optimal lifestyle where we have the right diet, the right sleep, the right stress levels, that even if we have 1 or 2 of those markers, it's not our destiny that we're going to get Alzheimer's. In fact, it should be incredibly rare to get Alzheimer's.
Exactly. It's called the ApoE gene, and there's even books about the end of Alzheimer's, because if you know you have that gene, there are things you can do exactly with stress, with diet, with supplements, with exercise to prevent getting it, even if you have the worst genetic deck.
Got it. Thank you.
That's a great example.
Myles, one more question on the genetic test, just because I've seen this popping up in the news recently around security and data and like what might happen to your genetic code.
Great. Yeah.
Can you talk about are all genetic tests created equal? Where does this data go? Is 23andMe evil?
Yeah. Well, okay. So that's a great question. And each company's different, so do your research. They're not all the same. And some genetics testing is only checking for these individual genes called SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms. Some will look at more than others, and some will look at what's called pathways. So some of them, like 23andMe, it's not that they're evil, but they're now open about their business model is basically selling your data. Now, not individualized data. So they're not going to tell anyone that Brian Stacy has, this one gene, but they are going to sell the whole database of genes to find what are the problems occurring in the populations that are tested. So they can say people on the East Coast of the US have a lot of risk of these conditions. And then it's oftentimes a pharmaceutical company that's buying that data to know what kind of drugs need to be developed because they see what kind of disease propensities are visible from those genes. So 23andMe admits that. So that's, again, they're supposedly don't sell identified data, but they do sell your data. That's their business model. I like a company called 3x4 because number one, they look at pathways. So instead of just looking at individual genes, they look at genes that all work together to affect a certain thing in your body. Like they'll look at all your genes regarding fitness and exercise and say, well, one gene says you're likely to get injured and get an Achilles tendon rupture. Another gene says you're not. So which one's stronger? As opposed to just seeing a report where you say one gene says, oh, be careful, you're going to rupture a tendon. The other says, don't worry about it. And you like, well, what do I do? They're able to weigh out all those genes and say, on balance, you are a little higher risk. So make sure you warm up and stretch. Or one gene says you're going to be low in vitamin D, and other says you're not, which is stronger. So I like how they weigh all those out. And I like that they only sell through clinicians. So their business model is to train clinicians, nutritionists, doctors, coaches. And that's how they make their money, is training these clinicians and then selling the tests to the clinicians to use with patients to provide patients with diet, exercise, and supplement recommendations. They don't sell supplements. They don't sell the data to anybody else. So I happen to like them. I'm on their scientific advisory board, but make no money from them. I have no share or equity in them. So I just think they're a very legit test. And there are other tests that are good as well. But yeah, great question. You want to look for ones that are giving you a lot more information about the strength of impact of each gene, not just which gene you have.
What I like about the model you just described was it 3x4 or 3x4?
They say 3x4. Yeah, it's 3x4 genetics.
Is that they're training through clinicians, because if you're going to go out and get a genetic test on your own, and the data that comes back, you're going to have no idea how to read that, right? Like none.
No, exactly. People look at it and literally they spend 10 minutes like, okay, cool. Like I'm from Iceland and I might have a heart attack when I'm 50. And then
now what?
They know what to do. And then
Right.
It gets filed on their Google Drive. And that's it.
I want everyone who's listening to this, if you're thinking about getting a genetic test, you need a trained medical professional to walk you through the results. Unless you're the medical professional yourself, you need someone to walk you through those results. Otherwise, you're not going to interpret it.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So that's the genetic testing. I think the other are hormones that you talked about. And again, sometimes in your regular annual physical, you'll get like thyroid hormone and testosterone checked. And that really isn't enough because hormones, many of your listeners might know, hormones by definition have receptors all over the body. That's what defines a hormone. They actually have impacts on all your tissues. So even, for example, testosterone, we think of as a sex hormone. Yeah, it has a big role in your sexual libido and making erections, but it also has a role in building muscle mass. It has a role in your brain and helping you have clear cognitive thinking. It has a role in your gut. It has a role in all of your tissues. On your heart, we know guys with low testosterone have higher risk of heart disease. There's some direct connections there. So having a full assessment of all your hormones is important for your overall health. And then when checking them, unless you see somebody who really knows what to check for, sometimes they won't check what gives you a really good sense of how healthy you are in terms of, for example, testosterone, because testosterone itself isn't enough. You kind of have to check estrogen as well, because that needs to be balanced correctly. Even for guys, we have estrogen. We don't have as much as women, but we have some, but you don't want too much relative to your testosterone. You want to check your actual available levels, which are called free testosterone or bioavailable testosterone, because most of your testosterone is bound up to proteins and can't really do the work it's meant to do. So you have to figure out, for this guy, his total testosterone might be fine. And your regular primary care doctor may say your T is good, but you need to go to the next level and say, yeah, but what's my available testosterone? Because if I have a lot of these proteins that bind to it, then my available is low and it's as if my total is in the toilet. So those are really important if you're feeling symptoms like low libido, sexual issues, fatigue, brain fog, hard time building muscle mass or losing belly fat, moodiness, depression. Think of like what typical symptoms we think of women that are beginning menopausal issues. That would be very similar to some of the symptoms guys would have when their T is really dropping.
That's really helpful. Thank you. This is something that a lot of, we talked about this 2 years ago. A lot of men don't even have a baseline for what their hormone numbers are because their doctors during the physical have never really given it to them. So you don't know, are your numbers changing dramatically with your age, with your diet, with your workout routines? And so it is super helpful. And I guess if a man who's listening to this is like, okay, I have a physical coming up, could I just go to my doctor covered by my insurance and ask for these as part of my, the annual blood panel that I get? Or is this a test that needs to be run separately?
Yeah, you could certainly ask for some of them. I have a book called Optimal Men's Health that tells you exactly what to ask your doctor for example. But a lot of doctors aren't, A, going to really know some of these tests to order, or B, will worry that insurance isn't going to cover them, so they won't order them. So certainly try. They're not going to order the stool test we'll talk about in a minute. They're not going to probably order the genetic test. They may or may not order the full hormone panel, to be honest. And they certainly won't order a full heart disease prevention risk panel, because of some of those things aren't covered by your regular insurance, unfortunately. And so they're dealing with just what's covered by insurance. And I feel like healthcare shouldn't be dictated by what's covered by insurance. It should be dictated by what the science says and what can really help me help you to have optimal health.
I'm going to link your book, your TEDx talk, your website, everything that you've been referencing here. So for anyone who's scrambling to write all this stuff down, we've got it in the show notes.
Awesome. Yeah. So certainly ask. Absolutely. But to some extent, it's not always covered by insurance. They're not crazy expensive, but you often need to see what I'm an integrative medicine doctor or a functional medicine doctor or someone who focuses on prevention or lifestyle. And it doesn't have to be a doctor. It could be a nurse practitioner. It can be other types of practitioners that will help order these tests for you. And then some of them you can order yourself online. There are certainly companies you can order tests from. You can come to my company, Vault Health, that I'm the national medical director for. There are other lab tests that you can order direct delivered to your home to check some of these things.
Excellent. Shall we talk poop? Poop tests?
Yes. Poop. You're so into the poop, man. All right.
Who's not?
Yeah. So, poop tells a lot. And I think by now, again, most of your listeners have probably heard about the biome and the bacteria we have in our gut and the fact that we have more bacteria in our bodies than human cells. We are more bacteria and microorganism than we are human, actually. Obviously, they're a lot smaller, but they are very prevalent and they're important. They help us digest our food in ways that we don't even notice. So when you have the right kind of what's called biome, the right kind of bacteria in your gut, it helps your gut do a bunch of different things. It helps your gut absorb nutrients it's supposed to. It helps it digest food without creating gas and bloating and farting and all of that. It also makes sure your gut stimulates the right production of chemicals that are neurotransmitters. You actually have a giant nervous system around your gut, which makes more serotonin than is made in your brain. Serotonin's the calming chemical, it's what Prozac and Zoloft and everything affects. If your serotonin's off, you can feel depressed. That is actually manufactured more around your gut than in your brain, even though it acts in your brain. And if your gut bacteria are off or your gut isn't functioning right, and you're not digesting food right, and your gut's inflamed, you're not going to make the right amount of serotonin. So it affects everything when your gut is off. It's not just this tube, which again, that's what I learned in medical school. It's just doesn't matter. From your mouth to your anus, it's basically this inert tube, and you don't need to learn much about it, right? And
Mouth
so
to
we now
anus.
know it.
That's
There's a beginning, there's an end, there's something in the middle. That's a tube.
Exactly. No, it's actually, yeah. So with all respect to gastroenterologists, they knew this was like an important organ that does a lot of functioning. So how do you test the function of the gut? I mean, the best way to do that is checking the poop, checking what's coming out the other end, because from that you can see a lot. And again, your regular doc isn't going to know these tests necessarily. Your regular doc will order a stool test just to make sure you don't have a bad infection, a parasite. But what we're talking about, the type of test Dom did, is looking way deeper to say, okay, are there inflammatory markers in my gut that are found in the stool? Do I not have disease causing bacteria, but do I have enough of the right bacteria so my gut's working right? Do I have a lot of bacteria that isn't really disease causing, but it's not really helpful? It's not all the good kind. And so that makes it crowd out the space. So I don't have enough good kind. Do I have types of bacteria that make it hard to lose weight? That's a big one. A lot of people with obesity issues have a bad balance of bacteria. Do I have evidence that I don't have digestive enzymes, so I'm not breaking down food properly, or I have yeast or fungus? So all those things can be found by checking your poop.
Let's talk about this because it's a real personal story that I've finally mastered my gut. And I can tell you it's been a mountain I've climbed for 15 years. Like 15 years I've been trying to figure this thing out, where I must have ravaged my gut during college when I was doing the Taco Bell and Milwaukee's Best Light diet. It's like
fourth meal.
The fourth meal. Like Myles, it was literally like after midnight was when we would get in the car, drive to the Taco Bell. I know the guy's name who worked at Taco Bell. His name was Tony, and we would call him Tone the Bone for whatever reason. 4 nights a week after midnight. And then, Milwaukee's Best Light 5-6 days a week. That's like what I did in college. And growing up,
so bad.
I ate all the cereals. I ate Burger King, McDonald's, like that was what I did to myself. And then
wait, before I got to interrupt you and tell you a quick Taco Bell story that's relevant.
Please.
So I did one of those, yes, back in the day, fourth meal stops at Taco Bell. So late that the delivery truck was coming up and they're offloading all the stuff from the delivery truck. And I swear to God, on the outside of the cardboard box, you know how there's like grade A meat is like the best beef and grade B. They were stamped on the outside of the box, grade D, but edible.
No.
Yes.
Too much information.
So
that's real. Like, no wonder they have to deliver that in like the dark of night so that no one sees that shit.
Right.
Grade D. Anyway, and it actually said but edible on the fucking box. Jeez.
It may as well had a hazard sign on it. Oh my God.
Holy shit.
Anyway, so you were destroying your gut.
Yeah. Vishen Lakhiani talks about like humanity plus and humanity minus companies. Like these companies that are in business, they make profits and they're like, big, huge brands, but PepsiCo that owns Taco Bell and whatever.
Yeah.
Humanity minus company. So ravaged my gut. And I think it was in my mid-20s where I really started to gas was like just commonplace. No matter what I would eat, healthy food, unhealthy food, gas after every meal, uncomfortable, smelly. And over the course of the last 15 years or so, like I've started to eat much healthier, much cleaner, no processed foods or very little processed foods. Even with that, I would still feel uncomfortable. And so anytime I'd go out on a date or, if someone would be sleeping over, like there was always that, like I have to leave the room or, I don't sleep well at night, those kinds of things. And it starts to feel like a prison cell. I came to you before you and Brian had built this whole infrastructure for our group that we're going through. And you ordered me a stool test, which I brought to a nutritionist. And it was very clear. It was just like, oh, you're missing a very important digestive enzyme. Put me on some probiotics, some digestive enzymes. And my system is like now this is 3 months later, like 95% cleaner. And over the holiday, over the new year, I had a friend of mine. She flew in from Germany and she's just a friend. Like it wasn't anything romantic, but she stayed with me for 5 days. I only have a 1-bedroom apartment. I got a king size bed. So she stayed with me. And that was the first time in like 15 years where I had someone stay with me in close proximity where there was no concerns, no worries, no discomfort. And that was like, for me, it was revolutionary. And I've also noticed like the upgrade in my mood, because you said the digestive system is, that with serotonin and everything's connected. So like, I just want like our listeners to know my personal story, man. And I'm sure everyone's going through their own thing. Getting the science behind it, getting the support on this stuff can be really life-changing.
And without that, right, we're kind of shooting in the dark. So we're looking at Instagram, we're reading the different articles, and it can feel really, really overwhelming. And I think what's beautiful about having someone like Dr. Myles or Bree, the nutritionist, is they can pinpoint like a laser beam. It's like, great. So we just did all this stuff. We know what your goals are. Here's the thing to do. Dominic, take this probiotic, right? Don't eat this sort of food because your genetics are saying that that's not going to be good for you, right? And all of a sudden, poof, you start to get that energy and you start to get out of your gaseous prison cell.
Yeah. And I think the coach part's really important as well, because you can do these tests and just feel overwhelmed. And many of the doctors that order these kind of tests will give you this giant plan to start taking digestive enzymes and changing the way you eat and start exercising and doing stress management work and taking some supplements. And it's just too much. So one thing that I really emphasize is what's your one next best step? What's one thing you can do? And that's what the coach really helps you with. So after I meet with somebody, the coach meets with them and is like, all right, Dr. Spar has these, 4 or 5 things you should do. He really wants us to figure out what's the one next best step. You're not allowed to work on all 4 of those right now. So what's the one lever that we think is going to be the most impactful on whatever our goal is? And that might be working on sleep and just holding off on any dietary changes. So that's the other thing to tell guys, like if they're afraid like you were about getting any testing done, you're in control. Like you don't have to do whatever comes out the other end from that test. You're like, all right, I see that this test says I'm at high risk for heart disease, and I should do all these things. What's the one most impactful thing I can do now? Let me dial that in. And then I'll add a second thing. And that's where a coach really helps you. Just like you have a coach with sports or anything else, they're not the one necessarily with all of the expertise in the interpretation of the labs, but they are the ones that are your guide for you, Dom, for you, Brian, for you, listener, what's important to you and which of these levers do we think you could actually implement? And then how do I hold you accountable to implementing it? And let me help you measure. And this is where Brian's been really helpful with this program. Let's look at how do we measure the impact this change is having on your life as it is relevant to what your final goal is.
That's the really exciting part for me. So the program that we're putting together for the mastermind here is a 3-month program. There's a very specific beginning. There's a very specific end. At the end, we do a rebaseline of some of the tests that we did in the beginning. Of course, we're not going to do the genetic test again. That's already done. But when we're looking at hormones and everything else, the reason that we're doing that is because we want to see what works, right, for these individuals. So over the 3-month period, we have the laser beam that we get with all the testing up front, right? Dr. Spar looks at that and makes some recommendations. The coach keeps us on track in terms of what we're doing. But then we want to see, right, 3 months later, what are our panels looking like? How are we feeling? Are we closer to our goals? And that's the part I'm really excited about. In college, I worked in GNC. And you walk into a GNC and you see all these pills on the shelf. They have these different labels on them. They look different. You flip them around and you take a look at what's actually in them, and they're marketed like wildly different. But they have like one tweaked ingredient here or there. And so like all of this stuff can be really overwhelming in terms of like what actually works. And that's what we're doing as part of this program. We're like looking at this, we're doing the activities, we're then rebaselining at the end to see both empirically, right? Did this work? Do my panels look better today than they did 3 months ago? And how am I feeling? Am I moving closer towards my goals? So I like this kind of sprint, if you will, of a 3-month thing and do the one next best thing as opposed to like my whole life needs to change, because that can feel overwhelming.
Yeah, Myles, a question about that, like the statistics, right? The data on day 1, you get the tests, you look at the panels, you look at the numbers. Day 90, you have an updated numbers. That is so important, at least based on my experience, because sometimes how I feel can be deceiving. Meaning there could be stuff going on, like the body has a way of finding its own balance. Like if I'm stressed out, some hormones will change to kick something in where I may not perceive that something's wrong, but I may be completely out of whack and I don't have those numbers. Conversely, like I could be feeling quite like shit. And like, I haven't felt the effects of the protocol yet, but my numbers are actually trending positively. And, it just needs a little bit more time before like I can start to feel different. Is that been your experience too? And is that why it's so important to not just have the feelings, but also the underlying numbers to validate, the progress someone's experiencing?
Yeah, you really need some metrics. I mean, I feel like especially guys, but it's really anybody who thinks like a stereotypical guy, which is it's really nice to have a line to measure and then to see how you're doing and to find out if you're really making the improvements you want to be making. And so that's where the metrics are really important. We love to use trackers. So if we're working on something that we know is impacted by sleep, then having an Oura Ring or Whoop device or Fitbit or something that can measure sleep is really important. So we can say, well, we're doing all these interventions because I really think sleep is going to help you achieve your goal. But let's see, are these interventions helping your sleep or not? You might, like you said, you might feel like you're getting better sleep, but what does the numbers show? Is your deep sleep improving? Is your REM sleep improving? Same with stress. Like, yeah, it's one thing to say, do you feel less stressed? That's a little bit hard to really evaluate, but heart rate variability that a lot of these devices can track is a very respected indicator of how much stress does your body feel? What's your nervous system feeling? And it's actually really, I think with guys, it's even more important because, again, stereotypical guy, I don't mean to generalize, but we are less in touch with our bodies oftentimes than women are. And part of that might be evolutionary. Women have to be very in touch with their body because of reproduction and whatnot.
Cycles.
But guys, like we're just not. And so sometimes it's hard for us to really gauge, when are we stressed? When is our nervous system in overwhelm? Like, can you even tell?
That's great.
Whereas if you have some kind of metric that is physiological that can be measured, it doesn't have to be a blood test. It can be a wearable device, or it could be measuring your waist circumference, or, how long can you hold your breath, or find something objective that isn't just how you're interpreting it. That can really tell you, give you a reality check.
Can you talk about some of those wearables? I mean, you did a great job with this in the mastermind of breaking down Oura versus Whoop and maybe even, chiming in on Fitbit.
Yeah. So there are a lot of them now that I think it's so helpful. Number one, to really, like I said, do a reality check. And number two, to have some way station along the way to see if you're making the progress you want to be making. So the wearable you pick depends on what you're trying to move the mark on, So if sleep is an issue for you, Oura Ring to me is the best device for that. OURA. You wear it on your finger and it tracks deep sleep, REM sleep. It also tracks other things, but it is the Cadillac, we used to say, the Tesla of sleep devices.
Great call. Cadillac. Yeah. I mean, like what's Cadillac's brand anymore?
Right.
That's a phrase ready for upgrade.
Yeah.
Yep.
It is not right. It is not the Taco Bell of sleep.
Great D, but drivable.
So I love the Oura Ring if sleep is your thing. If your thing is like recovery and strain and overall stress and understanding how that's impacting your function, Whoop device is awesome for that. WHOOP, you wear it on your wrist and it measures what they call a strain, which takes into account sleep for sure, and it's still good at sleep, but also looks at stress measured as this heart rate variability and how much activity you've had the prior day. And it gives you a sense of how much strain your body's ready for. So it's a really good indicator, basically, of how much work you're doing. So if you're like, I'm going to work out hard to see if that impacts blank, my body composition, my energy, my blood sugar, this Whoop device will tell you how hard are you really working out? How much strain are you really putting on your body? I mean, like if you get your strain score up to like high teens, low 20s, you're pushing it. And if that's what you want to do, then this will validate you're doing it. If you think you're going all out and it's like your strain score is like a 14, which has totally happened to me, I'm like, God damn it, that was like a hard ass workout. Yeah. But my heart rate and my respiratory rate and my temperature and my heart variability was like, yeah, you're good. You could go more. You could go harder.
Yeah. That's what, by the way, Myles just turned 55 last year and did an Ironman.
Yeah. I did a half last year. I'm doing a
full one this year as a tip of the cap to the age of 55. So this man optimizes his health.
Yeah. So I really use these, and professional athletes, Major League Baseball uses the Whoop device to plan training sessions. So they'll say, okay, we think this guy should do a heavy workout, but I can tell from his data this morning that he didn't sleep well, he's stressed, so he's likely to get injured if I push him too hard. So we're not going to do the workout that was planned because it's too hard for him today. And then another day might be a light workout plan, but it's like, holy shit, this guy's ready to go. Like he's dialed in, stress is down, sleep is great. We're going to actually change it to a really aggressive workout. So Whoop's good for that. And then Fitbit is good for general activity tracking, which they all do. But if that's your main thing is I just want to make sure I'm getting my 10,000 steps or that I'm actually getting enough activity. Fitbit has a bunch of different devices and it's the most affordable because even their kind of baseline ones will measure your activity well. But again, nowadays, like your Apple Watch is also really good at all those things. So it's kind of like, I was in a Buick. God, I'm so old.
What are the new cars?
Like, it's like a reliable, it will give you everything. It's not like the best for sleep or the best for strain, but it gives you all that.
Toyota Camry?
Yeah, I guess a Camry.
Is it good enough? Yeah, Camry?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Remember the Cressida? What happened to that?
I don't.
Anyway.
No.
So yeah, it's good. And a lot of people like because it does a million other things, right? And it can tell you everything going on your phone without having to look at your phone. So, and then your phones themselves, Androids have the Google Fit and Apple has Apple Health. So you can also use your phones. Obviously you can't measure sleep with that, but you can track your activity level and other metrics.
I love it, man. The Oura Ring revolutionized my sleep. I've been using it for 3.5 years. When I first started, I was always down with the quality of sleep. The quantity of sleep. I was getting 7 to 8 hours. But the other part of that component is what's the quality of your sleep?
Right.
And Oura was measuring the deep sleep, the REM sleep. And I started to recognize, wow, I'm really short on deep sleep. I've more than doubled my average deep sleep over the past few years with the metrics and just learning I shouldn't be eating within 3 hours of going to sleep. And
exactly.
When I'm running masterminds with like a big screen and, lights in front of me late at night, I need to put on blue blocking glasses, just to get my eyes to all these little subtle tweaks, which I picked up over the way, leads me to this really quality sleep. So over the course of the day, this goes back to what you were talking about. Men are looking for focus, energy, mental energy. I used to be in a huge fog and needed lots of like coffee and stimulants to keep me going. I have my coffee in the morning, like a half calf in the morning, and I'm good for the whole day. Big part of that is to do with, how I've been able to monitor my sleep, and the metrics matter.
Yeah. And thanks for bringing that up. I mean, because you don't want to just measure it. You want to actually use that as data. It's real data. So just like you said, you want to then experiment like, okay, what happens if I look at a screen before bed? What happens if I have a drink or two before bed? What happens if I eat a meal late at night?
It's going to ruin drinking for you.
In general, what'd you say?
It's going to ruin drinking before bed for you. I'll just
I know. Exactly.
Spoiler alert.
For some people. Yeah. And so, but it'll at least, if you've been feeling like I really should do intermittent fasting, I really shouldn't eat after dinner, but it's really hard. Well, seeing in black and white that when you eat a meal within 3 hours of bedtime, it affects the quality of your sleep. That might really help you shut your pie hole because you'll see it that it really does make a difference objectively.
One other thing about this program that I'm excited about doing is the fact that we're doing this with a group. So what we're talking about is so individualized, right? We're really honing in on like, what does the individual need? That's amazing, right? We all got different genes. We all have different goals and everything else. But being able to do this as a group and talk with guys about what's working for them in the same time period in which we're all experimenting has already been valuable. I know we did a mastermind talk not too long ago where Dominic was going through a lot of the different supplements that you've taken. And I know a lot of the guys have bought an Oura Ring. They're starting to take some of these supplements like Kava, starting to see how it affects their sleep. It's been a really great resource to be going through a program like this or starting a program like this as a group. That's not something you're going to get your primary care doctor, right? This is a totally different feel on top of all of the stuff that we're doing.
Yep. No, it's using data to dial in everything you're doing that affects you achieving your goals via your health.
So, Myles, at this stage, you've given a lot of really good intel and overview of the considerations that men should be taking and some of the tests that they should be seeking. Someone now is saying, I want the whole comprehensive package. I want to work with you. What does that look like? And like I said, I'm going to link your website in the show notes, but what does that experience look like? How long would they be working with you? What would they expect to invest in something like that if you can, hit the high levels on?
Sure. Yeah. So I am National Medical Director of Vald Health. So you certainly could see some of the practitioners that work for me at Vald. We do men's health in general and metabolic health. But if you want to do the more intensive level, like we're talking about, that's working with me directly. And I do see patients on my own. So you would go to my website, drspar.com, just abbreviate Dr. DRSPAR.com to see if you're in a state where I can see you via telemedicine. I can also see guys in person in New York City. And basically the way it works is I'm not a primary care doc. I mean, I am at training, but I'm not acting as a primary care doc now. I'm acting as a consultant in optimal performance, everything we're talking about. So I see you for this at 1 hour intake, and we really go through, what are your goals? What does it matter if you have good health? How would health affect you and your ability to achieve your goals? And how could health be worrying you now? What health issues are you dealing with now? What are your goals biologically as well as kind of non-biologically? And then what tests, like we were just talking about, are most appropriate to kind of assess what are your risks for health being in the way of you achieving your goals, or what could be optimized. So oftentimes that's hormones and different blood tests regarding cardiovascular disease risk. It could be a poop test like we talked about. If there's any hints from what you tell me that could be an issue, it could be looking at food sensitivities or mold issues or a bunch of different things, right? So we'll do those tests. And then you'll come back and the coach, Bree, who I work with, who's amazing, Brianne Koff, she will sit with me in that session going over your results with you, where I'll say, okay, here's all the pertinent findings. And here's what I think is in the menu of things you should be doing that will help you achieve your goals, health or not. And it could be relating to changing your diet, adding some supplements, changing the way you're training and doing your exercise, adding in some core stuff, some cardiovascular, some strength training. How do we work on your sleep? How do we work on your stress? Do you have enough connections? Do you have a sense of meaning in your life? All those things that we'll kind of touch on and prioritize what's your most important next step. What feels comfortable to you, what feels doable to you, and what do I feel is going to be impactful on those measures? And then Bree takes it from there and works with you on, okay, let's go over again. Is this really the next best step? Does this feel comfortable to you? What does that look like? You're going to start exercising. How many days a week? What exactly are you going to do? Where are you going to do it? I'm going to text you and check in with you. I'm going to track that you're doing it through whatever tracker we've decided we're going to use, whether it's Oura or Fitbit or Apple or whatever it is. Or maybe it's a food thing and you'll use an app like MyFitnessPal to track your food. So she will kind of be there to hold you accountable. Then I'll see you basically every 3 months to see how are you doing? What biomarkers do we need to check that we're working on tweaking, and what tells us if we're having an impact in the direction we want to have? How do we need to change your plan? And that's basically the setup. So you have a very clear idea of what you need to do to achieve your goals, with a coach helping you through that, and me being your clinical resource with you really behind the steering wheel, and I'm next to you guiding you. In terms of cost, this is all out of network, so I don't take insurance because insurance doesn't cover this test or the amount of time that I spend, because it's about an hour for the first visit, an hour for the next visit. The rest of them are half an hour. Again, can be all via telehealth. So it's a $900 charge for the first visit. And then also for that first follow-up, that's an hour, it's another $900. And with that, you get the time to work with the coach comes as part of that. Follow-ups are generally half an hour, and those are half that price. And then labs, it really depends on what you need. I mean, I've tried to negotiate reasonable prices for labs. It can be anywhere from a couple $100 to $600 or $700, depends on what labs you need. And some of that could be covered by insurance that you could submit, super bills for reimbursement for.
Wow, man. So it seems like you've been able to put something together where if someone had a $5,000 budget to do this work, that it sounds like they could get the comprehensive package of your consulting, the nutritionist, coach, some of the labs.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And you could get definitely a year's worth of work done for sure for that. Absolutely. And even you could afford to get a wearable if you don't have one.
Right. For anyone who's never tried to do this, that is astoundingly economical. Astoundingly. Because to cobble all this together over the years, I've spent in the multiple tens of thousands of dollars trying to figure this out. And that's just the financial cost, not the emotional cost and the time cost and the physical cost. What's the quote? It's you're always paying for your health in some way. It's I'm butchering the quote. Do you know the quote I'm trying to talk about, Myles?
No, I know there's a man who has his health has 1 million goals and a man who doesn't has but one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Which I love.
Right.
But yeah, I'm not sure the one you're talking about.
Neither do I at this point. But I think what I'm trying to say is your health. And this is to finish on a quote that you had brought before. Health can be used by you as the most important tool in your toolbox. And when your health is optimized and dialed in, then you can have those 1 million goals versus if your health is out of whack, you only have one goal, which is to get healthy, and your life has flipped on its head. So this was an awesome conversation. You've been such a valuable wealth of resource and information for not only our mastermind, but for your third time on the podcast for our listeners. So we really appreciate you, man. I really hope that a few folks who are out there listening will contact you and experience the benefits that I know that we have and will have in the mastermind. And love having you here, man.
Absolutely. Great to be with y'all as always. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hey, it's call to action time. If you loved what Dr. Myles had to say, go to the show notes, check out the links that I provided there to get to his website, look at his book called Optimal Men's Health, his TEDx talk, all linked there in the show notes. And if you're starting to get a sense for the cool stuff that we're doing in the mastermind communities and you want to take a further look at maybe becoming part of the work that we're doing here to optimize yourself and to live in alignment with your great man, at the top of the show notes all the time is a link to learn more about joining the digital mastermind. We've got a 7-minute video there that has everything you need to know about the digital mastermind, along with a link to schedule a call. So go check that out. And maybe someday soon, I'll see you in the mastermind.